So today we are having James Gibbons from Abridge, where he builds scalable, event-driven systems for healthcare applications. Today he's going to talk how Abridge uses Temporal to power reliable Agentic workflows for real-time clinical audio processing. Please join me and welcome him to the stage.
Cool. Awesome. Yeah, thanks. Hello, everyone. My name is James. I'm a software engineer at Abridge. And today I'm going to talk about Agentic Ambient Active Listening at Abridge. Grab this. Yes, a little bit about myself. I've been a software engineer for about 7 years now, kind of across the stack. I've mostly worked in the health tech and insurtech and also industrial IoT space. I started out studying chemical engineering, got a bachelor's in chemical engineering, decided to move to computer science and got a master's in computer science. Yeah, so Abridge. So at Abridge, we record the conversation between a clinician and a patient. We ingest that audio into our backend, transcribe it, and drive a whole suite of products for the clinicians based off that transcription. So yeah, we work in real-time, high-stakes healthcare data, a lot of PHI, and it needs to be durable and reliable, and that's why we've chosen to use Temporal. And we're also deployed across hundreds of healthcare systems and providers, and we integrate with several electronic health record systems. Yeah, so first I want to talk about my history and path to workflow orchestrators. So I was at an insurtech company. We would generate insurance quotes for customers that would go through like our underwriting service, which would go to our risk management microservice, which would call our pricing model and return a kind of a quote back to the customer. And this is like the synchronous microservice world, like probably most of us have been in. And there's a lot of issues with this, right? Observability is such a pain. I have to dig through logs, metrics, tracing. And with Temporal, I just go to the UI, look at the workflow, and I can see, hey, this activity is taking a long time, or there's a failure at this specific point in time. Obviously, durability is an issue as well. If one of these services goes down, do I just kind of ignore that data and kind of return a quote back that's potentially misquoted, or do I just rely on the customer to come back and retry in the future? And yeah, for the big issue is like, where do I tap into this for new features, right? So like when and where can I tap into it if I have a new feature request without like causing timing or race conditions? So at another company I worked on at a health tech startup where we tried to solve our durability problem with SQS queues and Kafka topics, right? So that helps in a way, but then also doesn't really solve our observability. In a sense, it actually makes it worse and harder. And then we have this new introduction of problems that we can have with poisoned records, blocking other people on a Kafka topic, and we have to kind of have this DLQ system to retry those records. So yeah, when you kind of look at this too, it kind of looks like the internals of the Temporal server, right? It's a queue-based system. You can have a Kafka topic, which is replayable, right? It's a append-only system. And then you could potentially have like the status service where the client is polling for a status. But with a Temporal, this is like an abstraction of all this built out for you, so you don't have to manage this architecture. And then I was a founding engineer at another insurtech company where we processed scanned images of medical and legal documents. And they came in as PDFs, and the PDFs would sometimes be tens of thousands of pages. So I was like, I don't want to go back to our previous systems, and I need something that's more durable. I need to batch process these PDFs into like 50-page chunks and process them in parallel. So if anything fails in that, I need something durable. So that's where I found step functions, and that really kind of changed my perspective of how we could build systems. But the problem with step functions is you kind of define your workflow in the infrastructure layer. So a step function is kind of a JSON definition, and there's a type system. We used AWS CDK. There's a type system to like kind of define what that JSON is. But kind of looking at this, like I don't know what this workflow does until I deploy it and kind of see the graph of what it looks like. So that's where I ended up at Abridge, and luckily we used Temporal, and that's where I got my experience with Temporal, and it's been amazing since then. Yeah, so like I said, at Abridge, we record the conversation between a clinician and a patient, and that's what we call an encounter. And it's very unique in that like the clinician, we have an app, they'll press record on their phone, put the phone down, and have a face-to-face conversation with their patient. So they've put a lot of trust in us to not lose that audio. So the audio has to be durable. And that's a very kind of interesting problem that we have. And then our use of Temporal, we have billions of actions per month. We have hundreds of workflows, and we're just growing more and more. So yeah, so some evolution of Temporal at Abridge. When I first joined the company, we kind of had this anti-pattern of one workflow to one activity. So we'd have a workflow that started, there would be an activity that would trigger another workflow that had one activity that would call an HTTP server that would trigger another workflow in a different namespace. And this is kind of just like back in the world of synchronous microservices. So we weren't really seeing the benefit of a workflow orchestrator. And then having the HTTP server in the middle also caused us a ton of pain. The activity kind of invoking that other namespace, if that call timed out, we'd retry again in the activity, and all of a sudden we're running like 10 times the amount of workflows in the calling namespace when there's like an outage and they're taking a while to process. So yeah, we refactored all that, and luckily we have this concept of an encounter, right? So this is like our encounter workflow. This is the audio ingestion. This is all the products we're guaranteeing to get back to the customer. This is kind of a stripped down version of it, and it's a lot bigger now. But you can kind of see there's the purple dots are the signals that an audio chunk has been uploaded. That happens every 30 seconds. There's an activity to transcribe it. And then finally at the end, when we get a completion call, that's all the products that we're running. So this is our new kind of single encounter workflow. And then we also moved to Nexus to solve our HTTP server in the middle problem. So as a caller in this workflow, I just make a single execute Nexus workflow command, and the calling namespace handles all the retry logics, so we don't have to worry about it. We're using Nexus a lot more. If you're not using Nexus, Nexus has been amazing. All right, so yeah, onto Agentic ambient active listening. So I've kind of established that Abridge is like an ambient listening device, right? So what is agentic and what is active, and like what problem are we trying to solve? So yeah, as the conversation happens and we're accumulating the transcript, we have these new product requirements to run these products during the course of the conversation. And we don't know when to run those products. So we just decided to put an agent in the middle of it to decide that. And then a second piece of this problem is that we were ingesting audio every 30 seconds. So we had lower latency requirements. So we need to, once something is said, to return back to the client within 5 seconds. To do that, we had to move to a streaming audio system. If you don't need durable audio, like I recommend not doing this. It's very expensive and a lot to maintain. But essentially, instead of 30-second audio chunks, we ingest 500 millisecond audio chunks. We post that to a Kafka topic. Kafka is very fast to read and write from, like single-digit milliseconds most of the time. And then this is a stateful stream processing problem. So we use Flink to process those audio chunks, accumulate them in a window, and then transcribe them. And then once we get the transcription back, we put those words on a Kafka topic, and we have a consumer off that Kafka topic to send signals to our agentic ambient active listening workflow. So we're using Temporal as a harness for that agentic workflow. There's a lot to this. This could be a whole talk at a streaming conference, but that's not the case. We did look into using Temporal for this, and as much as we love Temporal, there's some use cases that like it doesn't fit, I don't think. And that's like the streaming audio use case when you're moving a lot of data around at a high throughput. Like Temporal is not great for that. So going back, yeah, we're sending those signals, which are like just smaller chunks of words to our active listening workflow. And this is kind of a stripped down version of what that workflow looks like. So there's signals coming in as the utterances, and then we have this agent kind of accumulating this state and saying, based on this current state of the transcript, based on some enriched data I have from the patient and the clinician, should I run this product? And the product will run either in an activity or a child workflow. Unfortunately, none of those products are public right now, so I can't talk about it, but this is kind of like the general kind of idea of what it is. And using Temporal as a harness for an agent is amazing. Like, you get kind of a short-term memory out of the box, right? Because you can kind of save anything in the workflow, right? In like a dictionary or whatever, and the agent can actually look at that and say, hey, I already ran this product, so I don't need to run it again. And then we actually have another agent that the clinician can chat and talk with via text. So we're kind of imagining a world where we have agents in these workflows and they communicate with each other via signals and queries within Temporal. And obviously, yeah, it's durable and easy to extend and figure out like what's going on. Yeah, so that's agentic ambient active listening. I do have a demo. I don't have a live demo. When we built this out end to end, we're like, okay, what should we build? Let's build a to-do list. So this is some screenshots from our actual recording. But I can build the imaginary demo where I'm a clinician. I'm talking with a patient, and I say, I need to take your blood pressure, right? So this agent will pick that up, and we'll see, take patient's blood pressure, right? I continue having the conversation. The conversation's wrapping up, and I forget to actually take the patient's blood pressure, but I look over at the app, and it says, oh yeah, take patient's blood pressure, and I haven't done that yet. So I take the patient's blood pressure, I say 120/80, great, and then that'll just get checked off the list. So this is not a real product, but it was just like, yeah, we built a POC, and this is what our initial POC was. And then we have a bunch of products that we built off this that are, again, not public yet, but use this kind of same system. Yeah, and then we're also doing something cool with streaming tokens. So we use OpenAI to stream tokens back. And we are multi-region, so it's a little difficult to get those tokens back to the client, but we're actually using Temporal to do that. So we have a namespace, we have a workflow, we have an activity, getting the streaming tokens back from OpenAI, and we're sending a signal to another workflow in a different namespace that are like micro-batching those tokens. And we have a client connection in our API that's actually pulling that workflow for those tokens. So it's not like true streaming, but it is enough to really give it a feel that it is. And we kind of smooth it out on the front end. And this is actually an example that Johan built from Temporal. So he was the inspiration for this. So if you want to check it out, he has a GitHub repo for it. So Abridge is hiring if anyone wants to work in multimedia and LLMs and healthcare space. You can also connect with me on LinkedIn and GitHub. I've also been trying to contribute to the open source project. I have a few commits that I've made. for up-down counter and the metrics provider and core SDK links. But yeah, reach out to me if anyone wants to work on anything else. Cool, and yeah, a huge thanks to the Temporal team. Yeah, Jacob, Kevin, Chris, and Colin. Yeah, you guys have been amazing. Temporal is like one of the best vendors I've ever worked with. And yeah, it's a really awesome community. So cool. Thanks, everyone.